America, where the separation of church and state is absolute.
At a time when my life was just getting started, I couldn't have been more surprised by the series of events that would lead me down a new, different, and completely unexpected road of life and lessons. Hard lessons. With the birth of my little girl, my angel, my love, also followed a tidal wave of change. The change pulled me between two worlds. Lost between two worlds. Jehovah's Witness and Christianity. I lived and continue to live a personal internal tug of war caused by the ones I love the most, with my loved ones being used as ransom against the other. And that's where my extraordinary journey begins. My name is Eric Hutchinson, and this is my story. Outcome's going to be. However, what I do know is that there's a lot of people out there that are suffering right now, and the suffering comes from many different angles, but one of them that's very near and dear to me because of things that have happened in my life is basically religion and being raised in religious families. The impact that it has on family members that choose not to believe the same, it's life-changing. At this point, I just want to lay my story out, and my story encompasses a wide spectrum throughout my life just because it's been very extraordinary over the past 7 years, I must admit. And I don't know of a better way to get the story out than to do it by edit and showing, everybody through my eyes. So I decided I'm gonna go ahead and break it down into a series, and I'm gonna have different sections covering different topics so I can be in depth with all the topics. I truly feel that you need to have a full understanding of the entire situation to understand this story in its entirety versus me sitting behind the camera and just explaining it to you. Alright, so I guess let's go ahead and jump right into this. You ready? Come with me. At the end of the day, we need to protect our children's future. And how we do that is by righting our wrongs today, not leaving it for our children to deal with. It's not fair to them. We need to get it done, over with, and out of the way as much as we possibly can. My mornings didn't used to start out this way. I used to wake up at 6 in the morning to get the kids up and ready, get breakfast made for everybody, so that my wife could begin her day and go to work. While me, I'm a full-time, stay-at-home father. Or was a full-time, stay-at-home father. I arranged my life in a way that I could work from home so that I could be just that. If claiming to be a victim is powerful, believing you are a victim is far more so. Again, regardless of the actual facts, which, at any rate, we are all prone to interpret through a self-serving lens. Christianity was born in the harsh desert cultures of the Middle East. It got its start by defining itself in opposition to both Judaism and the surrounding pagan religions of the Roman Empire. Consequently, from the get-go, teachings emerged that helped believers deal with the inevitable conflict
by both predicting and glorifying suffering at the hands of the outsiders. Indeed, persecution was framed as making believers more righteous, more like their suffering Savior. Long before the Catholic Church made saints out of martyrs, the narrative text encouraged believers to embrace suffering or persecution, or even to bring it on. In the case of Christianity, the theology of persecution serves to give the faithful hope. It inspires persistence in the face of hardship, including the many hardships that life brings on all of us through no fault of our own. But it has also blinded generations of believers to the possibility that sometimes the hardships they face are due not to their faith or evildoers hating Jesus, but to the fact that they hit first.
I was raised in a born-again evangelical Christian family, a family of 4. I have a sister that's 17 months older than me. Our family was a very conservative family in both politics and values. Church seemed to be our daily life. My mother, she was heavily involved in our church, which made it that my sister and I were required to attend church with her, which came to 4 days per week. We started attending New Covenant Fellowship in Temecula, California, with Pastor Roger Brewer, starting when I was about 7 years old. We started attending New Covenant Fellowship around 1984, when we first moved out to our ranch in French Valley, California. I remember the church starting out with approximately 25 people at the time. And at the time, Temecula was hit with some rough times that caused most of the small businesses to close and move away, leaving the residents in a tough financial spot, being work was so scarce for this rural area. As a child, I watched our church and the congregation grow at a rapid rate. Not before long, the pastor was driving new Cadillacs and bought a thoroughbred training ranch. The church became state-of-the-art for its time. However, as I watched the church grow, the members that gave religiously to the church never prospered, never gained back the money that they gave to the church. They always were poor. My family was also hit by hard times. Shortly after my parents purchased their ranch, they needed to sell the property. My dad took the money we made off of the sale of our property and started his own business. He brought in 2 guys from our church as his business partners that ended very badly. Just after a year of business, his business failed, swallowed all of our money, and left us broke, left my dad unemployed. After my dad's business closed, he remained unemployed for about 5 years. From time to time, he'd pick up odd jobs, but that's about it. Instead, he would lock himself in the house all day and night, cleaning the house, almost like that turned into his job. He completely quit helping my mom with the horses. My mother was forced to provide for our family by herself, although she couldn't keep up with our bills. My mom was a professional horse trainer with a small career operation.
Yeah!
My sister and
That was
I
awesome!
were forced to go without most of our childhood, living on a ranch out in the middle of nowhere. No neighbors, no friends even close, hoping that we'll have food to eat for tomorrow. It was a struggle. At the age of 12, I began to ride horses and worked very hard to learn as quick as possible because I needed to help my mom.
What's this food? Tobacco?
I had bills to pay, and my father wasn't helping. At the age of 13, I began working for my mom, and by the age of 14, I was the main rider for our training operation that my mom and I shared. I did this so we can bring in new business and more business. It worked, but without fail on Sundays. I would catch my mom giving checks of $250
you so
or
much.
more of our hard-earned money, even though we still couldn't afford to go grocery shopping and keep food in our cupboards. I would ask my mom, "Why are you giving so much money?" And my mom would tell me, "Eric, the Lord will give back sevenfold." Well, sevenfold hasn't happened yet. But what I did see is I saw the pastor's personal life growing. His nice cars, his nice house, his thoroughbred training ranch, all the stuff he had going on for his kids. His family was provided for, well provided for. Off of me and my mom and all the other poor people in the congregation. When we moved on our ranch, about a year after that, I was about 8, my relationship fell apart with my dad because he became abusive to me, physically and mentally. I avoided the house as much as I could. I basically lived in the barn. It became my way of life. Isolated. When I started riding horses, my relationship with my mom blossomed into a business partnership. It seemed to be the closer my mom and I got, the more my dad disliked me. The more I did to provide for the family.
Nope, other foot,
The more my dad disliked me. As a child, I had no idea why my dad didn't like me. However, my father would commit a crime so disgusting and heinous, I've never looked at him the same again. And with the way my mom handled the situation, I've never looked at her the same again, either. One of the big events that basically made me stay out of the house as much as possible and to begin a career in riding horses is one day I was supposed to go to school and I played sick that day so I could stay home and ride horses. My mom takes off with my sister in tow, taking her to school. She comes back in about half the time it normally takes to get to school and back. But she came back with my sister. My mom came storming into the house. And my sister came into my room right away once they got into the house, and she told me that she had just told my mom that my dad has been molesting her. Well, obviously, I was disgusted. I was in shock. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to do. So I basically trusted in my mom to do what needed to be done. She needed to leave my dad. She needed to report him to the cops. She had to do more than just talk to people at the church about it, which also did nothing. Well, my mom did make a decision. And she started off with this Bible verse, Ephesians 22:33. Wives, submit to your own husbands, as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and himself its Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. And when she quoted that verse, she said that she is mandated by God to put my dad above everything in her life, including above me and my sister. Well, I think I want to take you guys for a little trip with me, and let's go to this old mansion and enjoy it. This empty pad is where our house once stood. This is where it happened. This once beautiful horse ranch now stands as an empty, vacant piece of land. As you can see, still isolated.
So this jump right here, I made this when I was a kid. Made this in the early 90s. some telephone poles that me and a buddy of mine cut down from an old chicken ranch over here. Still stands today. Right there in that open area right there. That's where we had our arena. Those trees, the first row of trees right here, that's where our barn was. I think we had a 20 stall barn, 30 stall barn, something like that. For training and obviously exercises. It's DG Road. This is the dirt road around this property that I learned to drive a stick shift on. Actually, that I learned to drive in general. You know, being here brings back so many memories. And as you notice, everything's gone. Everything. The sad story of this ranch is that it went dry from water because this ranch was operated on a well system. Apparently the well went dry, and the last owners here basically abandoned the property. And then that big dead looking tree right there, that's the tree I saw my very first animal slaughtered. Hung up by its back legs, and they cut the belly and the throat. This foundation right here is the barn. This foundation that's in the ground. So, this was the barn aisle. So and these were all the stalls, the rubber mats that's left over, but they obviously didn't take off the property. This right here, this is where the barn offices were. This patio is the one that I learned to skateboard on. Believe it or not, that's all I had to skate on. Sit here and watch the horses out in the arena. Mind you, these bushes weren't here before, but it is now. These were the bathrooms inside the barn. And then this pad right here, this one, this was the tack room. This is where we kept all the bridles, saddles, all that crazy stuff. And then right out just in front of me, we had the wash racks where we would wash the horses. Right here was what was called a hot walker. Walks the horses in circles and cools them off. And then right here, we had a round pen. Basically a round ring that had 8-foot high walls. And we'd use to basically train horses for various items, various things. So, you know, to be dead honest, I never thought I would be back here. It's crazy. It brings so many old memories and thoughts. I think this was part of my life that I was, I guess you could say, trying to forget. I don't know why, but the feelings I get here, it's like it's bad. Maybe because eucalyptus trees are always spooky, and now that these trees are so big, I don't know. It's crazy to see how much everything changes. This is like a metaphor. Just life is always changing. You never know how it's going to end up. I never thought I'd be on this mission. Never thought I'd be on this road. But what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. What's up, everybody? Now that I'm back home from Temecula, and I've had a couple days to think about it. Yeah, it was a mind-opening experience to be back on that ranch, and to be honest, I'm still affected by being back on that ranch. It reminded me of so much that happened in the past that I completely thought I got rid of the feelings. I thought I grew out of the feelings. I thought they just went away, but I was completely wrong. I think it's only fair to get in depth, in detail of the teachings and what I was told growing up that just didn't sit right with me, all the way to the point that it made me start to question the religion that I was in with my parents. There was a day that my mom was taking me to school, and I believe I was in 2nd grade at the time. I was in elementary school, young, and I remember on my way to school, my mom had told me that I'm not allowed to date outside of my ethnicity. But as a little kid, I didn't understand what she meant by that, and so I took it as she meant that I couldn't play with any other kids that weren't white. And that day I went to school, and this little Mexican boy wanted to play with me, and he was one of my friends that I'd been playing with for roughly about a year at that point. And when we started to play, I stopped him and I said, "My mom said I can't play with you. I can only play with white people." And so when it came down to what I was understanding and what I was picking up from what my parents were teaching me, is that races weren't supposed to mix. That mixing of races was basically ungodly, and that in order to stay godly and pure, all the races need to remain separate and date within their race group. Obviously, as a child, I didn't fully grasp that they're talking about dating. I feel bad for the little boy that I said I couldn't play with because he was Mexican, because I feel like that's something that he probably remembered also. And I may have been the first person to introduce racism to him just by saying that. I feel like there was a lot of anger and hatred within the church community, and that everybody was bad. The Mexicans that were trying to cross the border illegally, homosexuality, transgender, people moving here from other countries. It was, I hate to say it, I feel like my family was full of hatred and anger, and using God as a way to justify their anger and their hatred towards other people, whether it was because they didn't understand or because they didn't want to understand. But what I've learned over the years that's basically changed my outlook is, as I was growing up in my young years, I bought it, hook, line, and sinker, that there was a creator and that the creator's real, made everything. I believed the earth was only 6,000 years old. But as I was being taught this stuff, the questions that I had, they weren't being answered. Such as, how does the universe work? Obviously, most everything is theory and mathematics. But even as a child, when my mom would tell me that God made everything, I became a skeptic as soon as I heard that it was a man in our image that created all of this. It took some time for me to, I guess you could say, process the information. But I'll be honest, what made me start questioning religion in the very, very beginning, as I was sitting in church, watching the church grow, watching more members accumulate into this audience, and that the members, their lives weren't improving. In fact, it seemed to be that people were losing their properties, people were losing their homes, their jobs, at a very alarming rate. I didn't see the love and the compassion for the people in the congregation that was being preached. As I started bringing in finances to help support the family, as my mom is sitting there and she's writing a check, I didn't know what to think about that, because here we are giving money away when my unemployed dad is sitting in the house, cleaning the house, doing whatever the hell he's doing in that house. Meanwhile, my mom and I are busting our asses to bring in money and to pay our bills, but yet my mom's giving it away to this church. Well, there's this gentleman who came into our church one day, and I don't remember his name, but I know he was a younger guy. But this guy convinced the church that he broke the mathematical equation to cold fusion. And if you've seen Back to the Future 2, or even the end of Back to the Future, when Doc Brown comes in the DeLorean and he goes through the trash and he opens up the thing in the back that says Mr. Fusion on it, and he's putting trash inside of that.
Wait a minute, what are you doing, Doc?
I need fuel. Go ahead, quick, get in the car.
No, look, Doc, I just got here, okay? Jennifer's here. We're gonna take the new truck for a spin.
Well, bring her along. This concerns her, too.
Wait a minute.
That was a cold fusion reactor. So basically takes normal stuff that we have lying around, converts it, and basically turns it into energy. This gentleman came into our church congregation, convinced a whole lot of people that he broke mathematical equation, which right now is a physical impossibility to this day. The mathematical equation to cold fusion. Not only did he sell our entire church on this idea, he was promising the church millions of dollars. He was promising people in the congregation jobs, and that people actually started quitting their jobs to work for this guy. And then once it came to the point that everything was supposed to unfold the way that he had said it was going to, guess what happened? After he was borrowing money, he was living in people's homes, they were feeding him, the church was taking care of him, people were quitting their jobs, people were investing. And guess what happened? He screwed them all. He left. Well, I saw that happen as a kid. I thought it sounded weird when my parents were talking about it.
Hey, what is that? That god-awful smell.
I go poopy.
Did you just say that you went poopy?
Yeah, it was good.
Cold fusion. And they bought it. It blows my mind. And then shortly after that, as I had said that my family had a lot of financial problems, this was prior to the internet. And some gentleman got in touch with some people in our church and said that he was representing some prince in some country and that they needed to move money out of that country into America. So, problem was, they had to pay the import duties of bringing in the money. I don't exactly remember how it worked, but regardless, they needed people's money in order to move this money from this country into our country. So what they had offered people was every $100 that you give, you're going to get $100,000 for every 100 that you give. Well, as I said, we were in massive financial struggles. So my parents, because this was something that was going through the church and that the church as a whole bought into, they said, yeah, this is probably legit and this is solid. We're all going to make a lot of money. So the church, everybody pulled together, got money in, gave it to this guy. Well, as I said, we were having money problems. So my mom and my dad, because they believed the direction of the church and they believed the church, and they thought the church vetted this guy, they donated $200. With the $200, they were expecting $200,000 in return. Sound too good to be true? Yeah, because it is too good to be true. But as my dad was standing outside on our porch smoking a cigarette, I had come up from the barn and I was talking to my dad about that situation. And my dad said, don't tell your mom, but I actually put in $500. I stood there speechless. That was my money. my $500 that he put in. And I already thought it was a scam. But my dad thought he was going to make $500,000 off of 500.
Because Christians have this belief that there's a man on a cloud that loves them.
Well, as I said, we were very, very involved in our church. Youth group was something that was mandated that I had to do to my parents. Not only was youth group a complete drag, just because I was forced to do it, but I was forced to be with these kids that were full-on social introverts. I had nothing in common, didn't want to be there. And at that point, I started to feel like an outcast in the church. I didn't have any friends. I didn't hang out with people in the church. I didn't think the same way. The stuff that I was into, the children of the congregation weren't like me. And then they lived nowhere near me. So to be able to carry on any friendships in this was really hard. Well, one day I had gone on a youth retreat up to Big Bear. And I think I was in 6th grade at the time, that my parents forced me, literally forced me, to do child acting stuff, basically extra work. My sister was doing it, so my parents forced me to do it since she was doing it. Never wanted to do it. To me, it was embarrassing. I didn't want any part of it. And then at the time, I didn't read very well. And to stand in front of people, cold read, I just wanted no part of it. I was a horse rider. I like to work with my hands. I like to ride dirt bikes. I like to ride bicycles. I didn't want to act. So one day we go on this youth retreat. We go up to Big Bear. And one of my friends, as we're all in the bunks, because what I had found out over the time, when I would miss school and people would ask where I went, and I would tell them I was on this TV show, I was on this movie set, I had to go here, I had to go there, to where the teachers were talking about it to the kids when I wasn't there, because they thought it was really cool. However, it caused obviously a lot of drama in my life. It made other children not like me. They thought, honestly, I don't even know what they thought. They just, anytime that anybody would talk about it and bring it up, the attitudes that people would have towards me was basically disbelief, jealousy. I'm not exactly sure. All I know is when people would talk about it, I would turn into some sort of a ridicule at that point. So as we go on this youth retreat, one of my friends knew this is how kids were at school. These kids in our youth group, they didn't go to my school, they were our youth group. So as we're all getting ready to bunk in, and there's about 30 of us in multi-bunk beds around this big open room in this lodge in Big Bear. It's wintertime, snowing out. And as we're all getting ready to get in bed for the night, my buddy shouts out from across the room, "Hey Eric, tell everybody about the time you're on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air." And then as the first time that it was ever announced to the church that I'd ever done anything like that before. And so then I started explaining to the people what I did, that I did extra work. Basically, the dude in the background. When there's a crowded school and there's a bunch of people walking, I'm probably one of those people. No speaking roles, none of that stuff. However, get to be on a movie set, get to meet some cool people, but like I said, it wasn't for me. Well, sure enough, as this story goes off and I'm telling what they want to know, they're asking questions, I'm answering them. Well, I get up, I have to go to the bathroom. So I get up and go to the bathroom. And as I come back into my bunk, I notice that my sleeping bag on my bunk was perfectly made, just with the corner folded over. And I thought to myself, oh my God, here it is. They're already screwing with me. And so I opened a sleeping bag before laying down in it, and they had dumped a bunch of water inside of it for me to lay down on. They all started laughing, think it was funny. I get pissed off, bail. Literally start hiking it in the hills that I'm going home. Fuck these people. So as I leave, walk out into the snow, freezing my ass off, I'd go downstairs and talk to the camp counselors and ask them if I could stay with them in the counselor's room. They said no, go back upstairs. I explained to them what happened, and from that point I didn't go back into the room. Well, they ended up having to send out basically a camp search party that searched for me for 3 hours. I basically was on my way home, ready to walk home, until this kid, one of these counselors, found me walking down the street and talked me into coming back. Because I was gonna walk from Big Bear all the way to Temecula, because I'd had it up to here with all of it. I just, when I finally got back into the cabin, I just maintained my distance for the rest of the trip, basically from everybody. And again, even though all these people are here, isolated. If people would ask about it and I would tell them, it would instantly cause them to dislike me. It's weird. And then there was another issue with making friends. Riding horses. Riding horses in my area, even though that it was a horse area, wasn't looked at as something that was cool. It was looked at as something that was, we'll just say, uncool. Okay? So I went the vast majority of my life not even telling people that I rode horses. I rode horses up until, see, I rode horses solid for 22 years. Out of the 22 years, I rode 5 of those years professionally. I worked with a bunch of random horse trainers all over the United States. Some of them really big name, some of them not. Like I said, I was aiming to be a professional rider for the rest of my life. That's what I thought I was gonna do. I didn't realize I was using the horses as an escape at that time. That the love that I thought I had definitely wasn't a real love for it. It was more a love for the escape, I guess you could say. Even though I love horses, and even to this day, I really do like to ride, just not dedicated enough to go wrap myself back up into it. Let's put it that way. So then shortly after that incident, there was another youth retreat that I was supposed to go on, and it was down in Mexico. On this youth retreat was our youth pastor that at the time, he had a very, very beautiful wife. His daughters were beautiful. All of his kids were good-looking kids. It was a very good-looking family. And it was just strange with that youth pastor because he always had young men living in his home. These were always displaced men, but there was always a group of them, like 3, 4, 5 guys. And it was consistent. It was during my whole time that I knew this family, which was about 10 years. And I always felt weird around this pastor, this youth pastor, just with the way he was. He was very touchy-feely. But then again, a lot of people in churches are touchy-feely. It wasn't the normal kind of touchy-feely that you have with friends in church. This is more rubbing your shoulders, putting his hand on your side and squeezing. And my parents had asked me if I wanted to go on this youth trip. And I really didn't, because I didn't like the people in the youth group, any of them. They just weren't cool to me. And I felt completely out of place, didn't want to be there. And so when I was given an option to go or not go, obviously I said, no, I don't want to go. Well, that trip, there ended up being approximately 12 boys that went on this trip. And apparently, this pastor had them all naked, running up and down the beach as they were wrestling around with each other. My buddy comes home, tells his mom. My mom flips, or his mom flips out, calls my mom. My mom tells everybody. And then before you know it, this youth pastor, literally in his neighborhood, running down the street with a golf club, smashing in windows in cars down the street. Cops had to come, subdue him, and arrest him. And then it comes out that he was gay, but he wasn't, in my opinion, he wasn't gay. He was a pedophile that liked little boys. That's it. But he came out as gay to the congregation, to the church, and his family, and left his wife. I'm not exactly sure the story much after that, just because we had left. We had moved out of Temecula. So at the time that this happened, I believe I was 14 or 15-ish, right in there. As everything was getting underway, we ended up moving. My dad wanted out of Southern California, and rightly so. Why? Because he's running from his problems. He's running from what he did to my sister. He's running from what he did to me, to our family, to his own family. So we move up to Sacramento. And at that time, we all basically quit going to church. It seemed like that maybe my mom was getting over it. At that time, when I moved up to Sacramento, and being out of the church for as long as I was at that point, I really had time to think, and I really started doubting the existence of God. Because what I started to see in the congregation is that people were gullible. They were so gullible that they were giving away their money. People were stealing from them. People were molesting their children. There's multiple stories of how bad it was inside this church. But as true religious people do, they learn how to, in their indoctrination, to sweep everything under the rug and not address it because it doesn't fit their game. It doesn't fit their plan. It doesn't fit God. It doesn't fit godly people. It just doesn't work. So, as I have a little bit of time out of church, I really have some time to think. And with thinking, it just trying to figure out who I was. Because I had so many people through my life, the abuse from my father, my mother, not doing anything about the abuse, but, you know, at least she was there for a moral support. My sister and I, our relationship definitely wasn't good. And so basically I had nobody at home. The only person that I did have from time to time was my mom, and I do say that. But I didn't have anybody at home. I didn't have friends at school. I didn't have friends at the church. I was an outcast. I lived my life as an outcast. But once I moved and I got away from everything that was basically molding me and shaping me into the person that I am today, I started thinking a little bit more clear. And that's when I really found a love for science and wanting to explore what's going on out there. I mean, it can't be as simple as what the Bible says, can it? I mean, that the earth was dark and then God said, let there be light. And he doesn't know how it happened. He just said, let there be light. And then something else said, oh, he said light. Boom, there's light. And then he looks around and says, light's good. I guess the question that I had were so into how can this be true that I had to start searching somewhere else, because I knew it can't be that way, because just the sheer fact alone that this little blue dot suspended in the middle of vast dark blackness contains this fragile life that we call us, humans. We have animals. We have a very fragile system. So as I had time to think and I had time to jump into science, I really started to question, is there a God? At the time that I started questioning, is there a God, I was still very ultra conservative, a Republican, and just starting to vote at this time, right around 18. And as time went on, I maintained my distance from the church, and definitely maintained my distance from the evangelical church, never maintained contact with anybody from my old church. They could care less about me. Obviously, I guess I could care less about them, okay? Let's be honest here. So, as I moved back down south on my own, now I moved out on my own. When I went down south, I moved down to San Diego, and that's where I started going through it again. Questioning, should I believe in God? Is there a God? Why? Because my life was hitting some pretty hard spots. When I had first moved out and went down to San Diego on my own, when I left Sacramento, I left there in such a hurry to get away from my family. I left with a full tank of gas. That's it. No money, some clothes, some things to sleep with, some of my personal stuff. I drove from Sacramento to LA, stopped at my grandma's house. She gave me $40. From LA with the $40, drove down to San Diego. But when I first went down to San Diego, I lived about 2 weeks in my car until I got a job, got myself working, got into a restaurant within, I think, 72 hours after being there. So as you can imagine, I had such a bad taste in my mouth about religion. It took some time for me to mellow out and to start thinking about religion again and start thinking about God. Because at the end of the day, I always felt like in my heart to believe in God and to believe in religion was the right thing to do. But the reason that I felt like that in my heart, that's what I was programmed to believe. That religion is the right thing to do. The problem with religion is that it causes people to have blind faith. Blind faith in people. Trusting that those are words from a benevolent being. And we know magic isn't real. It wasn't real back then. It's not real today. Miracles of people walking on water wasn't real back then, and it's not real today. However, how I got myself to go back to church is I convinced myself, wait a minute, Jesus and God are probably real. However, the Bible's metaphors about how we should live our life. So I was trying to find a way to convince myself and talk myself into the fact that there is a God, that there is a heaven. So I started going back. This time I joined a non-denominational Calvary Chapel. As I started going back and started meeting Christian people, people who attended the church, those old feelings came back to where I felt like maybe this isn't the church for me. Maybe it's the church that's making me feel this way, that I felt uncomfortable. I wasn't interested in what the pastor was saying. I wasn't interested in what the other Christians were telling me. I felt that maybe I've lost my connection to Christianity to the point that, okay, maybe this Christianity isn't legit. Maybe I do need to look somewhere else. So, again, I took some time off. And then, when I started looking again, I didn't know it, but at the time, the vast majority of my friends were either Jehovah's Witness or ex-Jehovah's Witness. The ones that were ex-Jehovah's Witness, they weren't disfellowshipped, they were faded. So, but there was a gentleman that I had started working with that was Jehovah's Witness, and he started evangelizing to me. And the stuff that I heard, it's basically what everybody out there in public hears about Jehovah's Witnesses. You know, that it's a, they say they're Christian, they say that they believe in God, they believe in Jesus. However, they don't believe in the Trinity, and they don't believe hell is fire and brimstone and it's a place you go, and they don't think that Satan is a real person like God is. They think Satan is an evil spirit that that the world is his. He claimed the world, so he controls everything in the world, okay? And so as I was sold this idea, it kind of made me start, you know, looking into the Jehovah's Witness religion and started researching the religion. I just, you know, kind of got discouraged with the whole idea of God again, because I'm just going through this tug of war in my head about, is God real? Is it fake? Is religion real, or is it a gimmick? Is it a business, or is it real in love? All the stuff that I'd seen over the years, it was really making me question, what's the motive here? What's going on? So, at this time, I was roughly, 26, 27-ish, right in there. And I think it's because of where my age was. I wanted to be further in my life. I wanted to be married. I wanted to have kids. I wanted to see my life going forward, because I kind of was in this stage of feeling like marriage just was never going to happen for me. It was just always something. And I know what made it hard for me. What made it hard for me to get married younger is I didn't trust people. I didn't trust my parents. I didn't trust my sister. I didn't trust our family members. Didn't trust anyone at the church. Didn't have any friends around to trust and to put some faith into. The people that were on our ranch, it's just business people. So I guess you could say I started feeling like life was going to pass me by and I wasn't going to be able to get to do what I want to do more than anything. That's to be a dad. I remember the day that I realized I wanted to be a dad. I was a kid, and I remember thinking how bad my dad had treated me, and thinking to myself, how could he do that? And then a thought came over me. All of a sudden, I realized I don't have to be that person. I get to do it my way. I get to be better. And when that thought crossed my mind, all of a sudden, like a wave, I felt this incredible urge to be a dad. I felt like I knew what my purpose in life is. To share the knowledge, to share the experiences, to share the ups and downs of life, you know, I guess through my eyes. You know, we all go through it. We all have our rough times. And as I've been saying, you know, my story, this is just another story of some of the hardships that all of us face in life. There isn't anybody out there that has hardships more than anybody else. It's just, what do we have to do to deal with our hardships? I never thought in my wildest dreams that I would be standing here behind cameras, spilling my guts to the world. Never thought this would happen. I don't want to be standing here. I don't want to be saying this to you. But I feel like there's two people. Two that need to hear this. It's my children. Now this is when it gets interesting. This is when the story gets interesting. Once the Jehovah's Witnesses fully come into my life, that's when shit hit the fan. The Jehovah's Witnesses proved to me there can't be a God. It can't be true. The worst thing I could have done for myself, if I wanted to continue to believe in God, is to start studying with Jehovah's Witnesses.